a day of strikes and denials. The events of May 7th, 2025. The morning of May 7th, 2025, dawned with the deafening roar of fighter jets screaming across the skies of Kashmir. India, in a meticulously planned operation codenamed Operation Sindoor, launched airstrikes against targets within Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. These strikes, as asserted by the Indian government, were not random acts of aggression, but calculated responses to a heinous act of terrorism that had shaken the nation just weeks prior. On April 22, 2025, the serene beauty of Pahalgam, a picturesque hill station nestled in the heart of Indian-administered Kashmir, was shattered by a brutal terrorist attack. 26 innocent lives, most of them Hindu pilgrims on a journey of faith, were tragically cut short. The attack sent shockwaves throughout India, igniting outrage and demands for swift retribution. India pointed the finger squarely at Lashkar-e-Taiba, a Pakistan-based Islamist militant group, accusing them of orchestrating the carnage in Pahalgam. With evidence in hand, India claimed, they decided to act, striking what they labeled terrorist infrastructure across the line of control, the volatile and heavily militarized de facto border that divides Kashmir between India and Pakistan. Pakistan, however, vehemently denied harboring the terrorists responsible for the Pahalgam attack. As the dust settled from the Indian airstrikes, Pakistan painted a starkly different picture of the day's events, one of civilian casualties and indiscriminate bombing. The world watched with bated breath, bracing for the repercussions of this dangerous escalation. Conflicting narratives: India and Pakistan's versions of the story. The narratives emerging from India and Pakistan in the aftermath of the May 7th airstrikes were as different as night and day. Each nation presented its own version of events, each accusing the other of blatant aggression and disregard for human life. India maintained that its strikes were conducted with surgical precision, targeting only terrorist training camps and launch pads. They asserted that their intelligence was impeccable, ensuring that no civilian lives were lost in the operation. The Indian government released grainy aerial footage, claiming it showed the successful targeting of terrorist infrastructure. Pakistan, however, cried foul. They alleged that the Indian strikes were far from precise, claiming that bombs had rained down on civilian areas, including a health center. They released heartbreaking images of the dead and wounded, including a 3-year-old girl, victims, they claimed, of India's reckless aggression. Adding to the confusion, both sides made conflicting claims about the downing of fighter jets. Pakistan boldly declared that its air force had shot down 5 Indian jets that had crossed into its airspace, while India confirmed the crash of 3 jets within Indian-administered Kashmir, but remained tight-lipped about whether they were Indian or Pakistani aircraft. Kashmir, a history steeped in conflict and bloodshed. To truly comprehend the gravity of the May 2025 India-Pakistan crisis, one must delve into the troubled history of Kashmir, a region scarred by decades of conflict and bloodshed. The roots of this enduring dispute can be traced back to the tumultuous partition of British India in 1947, when this beautiful and strategically important region became a bone of contention between the newly formed nations of India and Pakistan. Both countries laid claim to Kashmir, with India citing the Maharaja of Kashmir's instrument of accession, and Pakistan pointing to the region's predominantly Muslim population. This dispute ignited the first of 2 full-blown wars between the 2 countries over Kashmir, leaving the region divided along the line of control. The line of control, however, has proven to be a porous and highly contested border. Infiltrations, ceasefire violations, and military skirmishes have become grimly routine, each incident threatening to plunge the region back into all-out war. The conflict over Kashmir is not merely a territorial dispute. It is a complex web of historical grievances, religious tensions, and nationalistic fervor. The presence of armed militant groups, some with alleged ties to Pakistan, has further inflamed the situation, adding fuel to the fire of this enduring conflict. Escalation and the spectre of war, a dangerous trajectory. As tensions soared in the aftermath of the May 7th airstrikes, the risk of a wider conflict between India and Pakistan loomed large. Pakistan, vowing to avenge what it perceived as an act of aggression, put its military on high alert and promised a befitting response. Military experts and analysts around the world watched with growing concern, warning of the potential for this tit-for-tat escalation to spiral out of control. The spectre of a limited conventional war, one that could quickly engulf the entire region, became a frighteningly real possibility. The situation was eerily reminiscent of previous escalations between the two nuclear-armed neighbors. In 2016, following a deadly attack on an Indian army base in Uri, India conducted what it called surgical strikes against terrorist launch pads across the line of control. In 2019, after a suicide bombing in Pulwama killed 40 Indian paramilitary personnel, India launched airstrikes on Balakot, a town in Pakistan. Each of these incidents brought the two countries perilously close to war. Section 5, The World Reacts, calls for restraint and diplomatic solutions. As news of the escalating crisis in South Asia spread, the international community reacted with a mixture of alarm and urgency. World leaders, recognizing the potential for this conflict to have catastrophic global consequences, sprang into action, urging both India and Pakistan to exercise restraint and seek a peaceful resolution through dialogue. The United Nations Security Council convened an emergency meeting to address the situation. The UN Secretary-General called for an immediate cessation of hostilities and urged both sides to engage in meaningful dialogue to de-escalate the situation. Similar calls for restraint came pouring in from global powers, including the United States, China, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the European Union. The international community's message was clear. The world could not afford another war, especially not one involving nuclear-armed adversaries. The stakes were simply too high. Diplomacy, not military action, was the only viable path forward. Section 6. The Fog of War, Misinformation and its Dangerous Influence. As the India-Pakistan crisis unfolded, battle lines were not only drawn on the ground, but also in the digital realm. Social media platforms, once seen as tools for connecting people and sharing information, were transformed into battlegrounds of propaganda and misinformation. Both sides engaged in a relentless online campaign to control the narrative, each accusing the other of spreading lies and manipulating facts. Misattributed videos, doctored images, and fabricated news reports flooded social media feeds, making it increasingly difficult to discern truth from fiction. This deluge of misinformation had a profound impact on public perception, fueling nationalist sentiments and exacerbating tensions. People on both sides of the border, bombarded with biased information, were led to believe the worst about their adversary, making peaceful resolution even more challenging. Section 7. The Nuclear Shadow. A terrifying possibility. Looming over the India-Pakistan crisis like a dark cloud was the terrifying reality that both nations possess nuclear weapons. India conducted its first nuclear test in 1974, and Pakistan followed suit in 1998, shattering the taboo against nuclear testing and ushering in a dangerous new era in South Asia. The spectre of a nuclear conflict, once unthinkable, became a chilling possibility as tensions soared in May 2025. The world held its breath, aware that any miscalculation or misjudgment by either side could lead to unimaginable consequences. The international community, fully cognizant of the nuclear stakes, redoubled its efforts to de-escalate the situation. The United States, which has long played a mediating role in South Asia, dispatched high-level envoys to both New Delhi and Islamabad in a desperate bid to avert disaster. Section 8. The Human Cost. Suffering and uncertainty on both sides of the border. Lost in the geopolitical calculations and the fog of war were the human beings whose lives were upended by the renewed conflict. On both sides of the border, families lived in fear, their lives disrupted by the constant threat of violence. In the villages dotting the line of control, where shelling and cross-border firing were a terrifying reality, residents were forced to flee their homes, seeking refuge in makeshift camps. Schools were closed, businesses shuttered, and normal life ground to a halt. The humanitarian cost of the conflict was immense. Hospitals on both sides struggled to cope with the influx of casualties, both military and civilian. The psychological toll on those who witnessed the horrors of war firsthand was incalculable. Section 9. The path forward, diplomacy, dialogue, and the urgent need for peace. As the India-Pakistan crisis entered its second week, the world watched anxiously, hoping for a peaceful resolution. The path forward was fraught with challenges. But one thing was clear: diplomacy, dialogue, and a shared commitment to peace were the only way out of this dangerous impasse. The international community, having played a pivotal role in preventing previous escalations between India and Pakistan from spiraling into full-blown war, had a responsibility to act once again. Sustained diplomatic pressure, coupled with credible offers of mediation, was essential to bring both sides back from the brink. The road to peace in South Asia would be long and arduous, requiring patience, perseverance, and a willingness to compromise. But the alternative, another devastating war between nuclear-armed neighbors, was simply too horrific to contemplate. The future of South Asia, and indeed the world, depended on finding a peaceful solution to the Kashmir conflict.